The town lay nestled between the snow-covered peaks, silent and unmoving beneath the weight of winter. The streets were empty, save for a few dimly lit storefronts, their signs swaying slightly in the cold wind. By day, Havenwood felt peaceful, almost idyllic. But at night, the silence stretched too long, the shadows lingered too deep. Ethan Cole pulled his coat tighter against the bitter chill. His boots crunched against the icy sidewalk as he walked, hands buried deep in his pockets. It had been 2 months since he left New York, trading the chaos of investigative journalism for the quiet of small-town life. He had told himself that he was here to heal, to escape the ghosts of his past. But the weight in his chest hadn't lessened. Beside him, Ranger, his German shepherd, suddenly stopped, ears perking up. "What is it, buddy?" Ethan asked, watching as Ranger sniffed the air, his body tense. Then came the barking, sharp, insistent. Ranger took off down the road, paws kicking up flurries of snow. Ethan cursed it under his breath and hurried after him, following as the dog veered toward the church at the center of town. The church loomed ahead, its stained glass windows barely illuminated from within. The steeple rose high against the midnight sky, a silent sentinel over Havenwood. Then, Ethan saw it. Just beyond the church gates, something dark lay sprawled across the snow. His stomach twisted. A body. Ethan's pulse quickened as he reached the scene. The woman lay motionless, her limbs awkwardly positioned, half covered in the falling snow. The first thing he noticed was the stark contrast of red against white, a scarf soaked in blood, still wrapped loosely around her neck. Ranger whined, pacing in a circle around the body. Ethan hesitated for only a second before crouching down, his breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. He recognized her face. Emily Carter. She had moved back to Havenwood just last year after finishing college, working part-time at the library. She was young, early 20s, full of life. And now she was dead. Ethan reached out cautiously, checking for a pulse. Nothing. A gust of wind swept through the trees, rustling the church's iron gates. The entire town was asleep, unaware of the tragedy unfolding in the snow. Ethan stood up, pulling his phone from his coat pocket. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed. "Sheriff Reed," came the groggy voice on the other end. "We have a problem," Ethan said. "There's a body outside the church." A pause. Then, the sheriff's tone hardened. "Stay where you are." Minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of the sheriff's cruiser cut through the dark. The car skidded to a stop near the gates, and Sheriff Lucas Reed stepped out, his face etched with irritation. "Jesus, Cole," Reed muttered as he approached, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Not my fault," Ethan replied, stepping back as the sheriff examined the body. Deputy Karen Hughes arrived next, pulling on gloves as she began securing the scene. Reed ran a hand through his graying hair, sighing. "Damn it. Emily Carter. I knew her parents." Ethan crossed his arms. It wasn't a robbery. No sign of struggle, no missing belongings. "And you would know that how?" Reed shot him a look. "Because I used to do your job, Sheriff." Reed didn't reply. Instead, he crouched down, eyes narrowing as he noticed something in the snow. "Drag marks." "She was moved," Reed muttered. Karen Hughes looked up sharply. "From where?" Ethan scanned the area, his journalist instincts kicking in. His gaze landed on the church doors, slightly ajar. A trickle of light spilled onto the snow-covered steps. Someone inside. Reed followed his line of sight. His expression darkened. "Stay here." Hand resting on his holstered weapon, Reed strode toward the entrance. Hughes followed close behind. Ethan exhaled, his breath fogging in the cold air. Something wasn't right. Ranger let out a soft growl. Then, the wind carried something else toward them, the faint sound of footsteps retreating deeper into the church. Someone was still inside. Watching. The wind howled through the trees as Sheriff Reed and Deputy Hughes disappeared into the dimly lit church. Ethan stood at the edge of the crime scene, the cold biting at his skin. Ranger remained tense beside him, ears pricked, body poised as if ready to pounce. Ethan knew that feeling all too well, the weight of something unseen, something just beyond the surface. Someone was inside. Someone who didn't want to be found. A few minutes later, Reed and Hughes emerged from the church, their expressions grim. "Nobody's inside," Reed said, shaking his head. "But someone was." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "How do you know?" Hughes held up a pair of fresh footprints leading from the pulpit toward a side door, one that had been left ajar. "Whoever was in there left in a hurry," she said. "And judging by the snow, they left not long before we arrived." Ethan exchanged a glance with Ranger. The dog had sensed it before any of them had. "Any security cameras?" Ethan asked. Reed scoffed. "This is Havenwood, Cole. Not Manhattan." Ethan exhaled sharply. No cameras meant no immediate answers. But there was still one person who might know something. "Where's Father Benedict?" They found Father Benedict Halle inside the rectory, sitting stiffly behind his mahogany desk. The priest was in his 60s, tall and severe, his face weathered from years of devotion. He looked up when they entered, his fingers laced together. "Sheriff Deputy," he greeted them. His eyes flickered to Ethan but didn't linger. Reed got straight to the point. "Did you see or hear anything unusual tonight?" Father Benedict sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead. "I was preparing my sermon when I heard shouting outside. When I looked out the window, I saw you arriving with the lights flashing." "What happened?" Reed studied the priest for a moment before answering. "Emily Carter is dead." A sharp breath. Father Benedict's face barely changed, but his fingers clenched just a little too tightly. "Dead?" he murmured. "My God, how?" "We were hoping you could help with that," Ethan said. His voice was steady, but he was watching everything, the way the priest's throat bobbed when he swallowed, the way his eyes darted toward the window, as if searching for something. I don't know anything," Benedict said. "Emily was a sweet girl. I baptized her myself." "I can't believe this." Hughes shifted. "Did you see anyone near the church earlier tonight? Hear anything suspicious?" The priest shook his head. "No, nothing." "Lear." Ethan could feel it. Benedict knew something. But why was he hiding it? Then Ethan remembered something. "What about the scarf?" he asked. Benedict blinked. "The what?" "Emily was wearing a red scarf," Ethan said slowly, watching him closely. "It was soaked in blood." There it was. A flicker of recognition flashed across the priest's face, so quick it might have been missed if Ethan weren't looking for it. But then, just as fast, it was gone. Benedict's expression hardened. "I don't know anything about that." "Lear." Again. As they left the rectory, Reed looked at Ethan with clear disapproval. "You need to stop pushing people, Cole." Ethan ignored him. Benedict was lying. "You don't know that." "I know when someone's hiding something." Reed let out a frustrated sigh. "Listen, I know you used to be some hotshot investigative journalist, but this isn't one of your big city exposes. This is Havenwood. We handle things our way." Ethan met the sheriff's gaze, unflinching. "And that way includes ignoring the fact that a girl was murdered." Reed's jaw tightened. "We're investigating. But don't forget, you're just a resident here. Let us do our jobs." Ethan held up his hands in mock surrender. "Fine. But you know as well as I do that this wasn't just a random crime." Reed didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing in the cold. But Ethan wasn't done. He knew what he had seen. Father Benedict knew something. And Ethan was going to find out what. Back at his cabin, Ethan sat at his desk, sifting through old newspapers he had gathered about Havenwood. He wasn't expecting to find much. Small towns rarely made headlines. But then, something caught his eye. A news clipping from 5 years ago. Local woman, 24, disappears without a trace. The woman's name was Lisa Reynolds. The place where she was last seen? Havenwood Church. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. Emily Carter wasn't the first. And if he was right, she wouldn't be the last. The storm rolled in overnight, blanketing Havenwood in an even heavier layer of snow. The town, already eerily quiet, now felt even more isolated, trapped under an endless stretch of white. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the old newspaper clipping. Lisa Reynolds, missing since 2017. Last seen at Havenwood Church. Now 5 years later, Emily Carter was dead. It wasn't a coincidence. He grabbed his notebook and jotted down a timeline. 2017. Lisa Reynolds disappears. Never found. 2022. Emily Carter is murdered outside the same church. Common denominator? Havenwood Church and Father Benedict Holly. Ranger let out a low growl, shifting from his place by the door. Ethan barely had time to look up before, thump. The sound came from outside. A heavy thud against the cabin's wooden porch. Ethan's blood went cold. He reached for the gun in his drawer, the familiar weight grounding him. Slowly, he rose from his chair and approached the door. Thump. Again. Ranger was already at the entrance, his ears pinned back, his stance rigid. Whatever was out there, it wasn't good. Ethan took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and swung it open. A gust of icy wind hit his face. But it wasn't the cold that made him freeze. It was the object lying on his doorstep. A single crumpled piece of fabric. A red scarf. Emily's scarf. The same one she had been wearing the night she died. Someone had been here. Someone was watching him. Ethan crouched down, carefully picking up the scarf. The fabric was stiff, still stained with dried blood. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. "What the hell?" he murmured. A message. That's what this was. A warning. Someone was telling him to stop. Ranger let out another growl, staring into the darkness of the woods that surrounded the cabin. Ethan followed his gaze but saw nothing, just the trees swaying in the wind, shadows stretching unnaturally beneath the moonlight. Whoever had done this, they were already gone. But they had been close. Too close. Ethan stepped back inside, locking the door behind him. His mind was racing, every instinct screaming that he was onto something. Whoever killed Emily was trying to scare him, which meant he was looking in the right place. The next morning, Ethan made his way to Havenwood Cemetery. Emily's funeral was scheduled for later that week, but the grave had already been prepared, a fresh mound of dirt covered in a thin layer of snow. He wasn't alone. Maggie Sinclair was already there, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her thick coat, staring at the grave with a faraway look in her eyes. "Didn't take you for the sentimental type," Ethan said, approaching. Maggie turned, giving him a tired smile. "Didn't take you for the kind who visits graves either." "I don't. But something doesn't feel right about this." She nodded. "No, it doesn't." A beat of silence passed before she exhaled, watching the mist of her breath fade. "Emily was afraid of something before she died," Maggie admitted. "She wouldn't tell me what. Just kept saying she made a mistake getting involved." "Involved in what?" Maggie hesitated. "She was asking about the church. About money. Donations, I think." That made Ethan pause. "Donations?" "Yeah." She was looking into where they were going. The Havenwood Church Fund. The same one Ethan had seen in her notes. Emily had found something. And it got her killed. That night, Ethan did what he did best. He broke into the church. With a flashlight in one hand and his gun holstered at his side, he slipped through the side door of the church. The air inside was cold, still carrying the faint scent of old candles and polished wood. It was empty, silent. He moved quickly, making his way toward the priest's office. The door was locked, but locks could be picked. A minute later, he was inside. The office was pristine, too pristine, almost as if someone had scrubbed it clean of anything useful. Except, Ethan's eyes landed on the desk. A ledger. The Havenwood Church financial records. He flipped it open, scanning the entries. There were large deposits coming into the church, all marked as donations. But that wasn't the strange part. It was the withdrawals. The money wasn't staying in the church fund. It was being transferred out of town to an unknown account. Emily must have found this, and someone killed her to keep it quiet. But why? What was so important about this money? Ethan was about to take photos of the records when a floorboard creaked behind him. He turned just in time to see a shadow move in the doorway. Before he could react, the lights flickered out. Darkness swallowed the room. Then a voice. "You shouldn't have come here, Cole." The voice sent a chill down Ethan's spine. His grip tightened on the flashlight, the beam flickering across the now darkened office. "Who's there?" he demanded, shifting slightly, preparing for an attack. No answer. Then movement. A shadow shifted near the doorway, barely visible in the dim glow from the streetlights outside. Then, a sharp gust of wind. The door slammed shut. Ethan lunged forward, yanking at the handle locked. Shit. Footsteps echoed down the hallway outside, fading quickly. Someone was getting away. Ethan wasn't about to let that happen. He pivoted, spotting a small window at the side of the office. Without a second thought, he braced himself and smashed the glass with his elbow. The cold air rushed in. He hoisted himself through, landing hard in the snow outside. His feet barely hit the ground before he was moving, sprinting toward the figure disappearing into the woods behind the church. "Ranger!" Ethan shouted, and his loyal companion was already at his side, launching into action. The chase was on. Ethan pushed forward, his breath clouding in the freezing air. The figure ahead moved too fast for an ordinary person in deep snow. But Ethan had an advantage. "Ranger!" The German shepherd closed the distance quickly, barking sharply as he lunged at the shadowy figure. But then a loud crack. A gunshot. Ranger yelped and tumbled into the snow. Ethan's heart seized in his chest. No! But he had no time to check on Ranger. The attacker was getting away. Ignoring the danger, Ethan charged forward. The figure turned sharply, disappearing into a grove of trees. By the time Ethan got there, they were gone. All that remained was a single set of footprints leading toward Havenwood Cemetery. And half buried in the snow, a glove. Ethan bent down, picking it up. A leather police-issued glove. His stomach turned. The killer was law enforcement. Ethan made his way back to the church, kneeling beside Ranger. The dog was alive, the bullet had only grazed his leg. "You'll be all right, buddy," Ethan murmured, pressing a hand to his fur. Ranger whined, licking Ethan's hand as if to reassure him. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. Someone inside the town's police force was involved. And Ethan knew exactly where to start looking. The next morning, Ethan walked straight into the Havenwood Sheriff's office. Sheriff Lucas Reed sat behind his desk, barely glancing up as Ethan entered. "Cole," Reed grunted. "You look like hell." Ethan ignored him. He pulled the glove from his pocket and tossed it onto the desk. "Recognize this?" Reed's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Where'd you find it?" "Behind the church. After someone tried to kill me." Silence. Then Reed leaned back in his chair. You're making a lot of enemies, Cole. Ethan's jaw clenched. Is that a threat? It's a warning. There it was again. Another warning. Ethan's instinct screamed at him. Reed knew something. But before Ethan could push further, the office door swung open. Father Benedict stepped inside. He looked between Ethan and Reed, his face unreadable. Then he spoke. "Sheriff, we need to talk." Alone. That night, Ethan sat in his cabin, turning everything over in his mind. Something was wrong. Reed and Benedict were hiding something. And Emily Carter had died because of it. The list of missing people kept replaying in Ethan's head. Lisa Reynolds. 2017. Last seen at the church. Emily Carter. 2022. Found dead at the church. Had there been others? Ethan reached for his laptop, pulling up missing persons records from the area. And that's when he saw it. A pattern. Every 2 years, a young woman had gone missing from Havenwood. 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. And now, Emily Carter in 2022. This was never just about Emily. This had been happening for years. A cycle. A ritual. A systematic cover-up. And Ethan had just ripped the lid off something much bigger than he had ever imagined. The realization sent a chill down Ethan's spine. This wasn't just one murder. It was a pattern or ritual spanning years. Whoever was behind this wasn't just covering up a single crime. They had been doing it for a long time. And the worst part? They were still out there. Ethan needed answers. And there was only one person who might have them. Ethan sat at the counter of Maggie Sinclair's cafe, staring into a steaming cup of black coffee. Maggie was wiping down the bar, watching him carefully. "You look worse than usual," she said. "Feel worse than usual," Ethan muttered. "I take it you found something?" Ethan hesitated. Maggie had been the only person in town willing to talk to him, but if what he had uncovered was true, the fewer people who knew, the safer they were. Still, he needed a lead. So he asked, "Do you remember Lisa Reynolds?" Maggie froze. She didn't move for several seconds. Then, slowly, she turned back to him. "Where did you hear that name?" "She disappeared 5 years ago," Ethan said. "And she wasn't the first." Maggie let out a slow breath. Then finally she spoke. "Lisa isn't dead." Ethan's head snapped up. "What?" Maggie lowered her voice. "She ran. I don't know where, but I know she made it out of Havenwood. And I know she was terrified. A survivor." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Do you know how to find her?" Maggie hesitated. Then, reluctantly, she pulled out her phone and scribbled something on a napkin. "I don't know if this number still works," she said, sliding it across the counter. "But if she's alive, she's the only one who can tell you what really happened." Back at his cabin, Ethan dialed the number. It rang. And rang. And then, "Hello," a woman's voice. Breathless. Nervous. "Lisa?" Ethan said. Silence. Then a click. She hung up. Ethan cursed, staring at his phone. She was scared. Which meant she knew something. And that meant she was still in danger. He needed to find her. Before someone else did. It took 3 days of calling before Lisa finally answered again. "Stop calling me," she said, voice shaking. "I know what happened to Emily Carter," Ethan said quickly. "And I know it's connected to you." Silence. Then a shaky breath. "You don't know anything," Lisa whispered. "Then tell me," Ethan said. Another long pause. Then, "Meet me. Midnight. The old motel outside town." Then the line went dead. The Havenwood Motel had been abandoned for years. The sign flickered weakly, half the bulbs burnt out. Ethan pulled into the parking lot and killed the engine. Ranger sat beside him, alert. Ethan stepped out, scanning the lot. Then, from the shadows, a woman emerged. She was thin, her hair tangled, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. But she was alive. "Lisa Reynolds?" Ethan asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered. "Tell me what happened," Ethan said. Lisa trembled. "I was supposed to die." Lisa's hands shook as she pulled her coat tighter around herself. "I was supposed to die," she repeated. Ethan stayed silent, letting her talk. Lisa swallowed hard. "5 years ago, I found something I shouldn't have. About the church. About Father Benedict. And about the people who really run this town." "Who?" Ethan pressed. Lisa shuddered. They call themselves the Shepherds." Ethan frowned. "The what?" "It's a secret society," Lisa whispered. "They control everything. The police. The money. And every 2 years," her voice broke, "they take someone." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "Take them where?" Lisa shook her head violently. "I don't know. All I know is I was next. But I escaped. And Emily," she squeezed her eyes shut. "She tried to expose them. That's why they killed her." Ethan clenched his fists. "Who's in the Shepherds?" Lisa opened her mouth. But before she could answer, a gunshot rang out. Lisa gasped. Then, blood bloomed across her chest. Ethan dropped to his knees as Lisa collapsed. "No!" Her eyes were wide, her lips moving, but no sound came out. Her body twitched once. Then she was gone. Ethan whipped around, gun drawn. But the shooter was already gone. All that remained was a single figure standing at the edge of the lot. In the dim glow of the motel sign, Ethan saw him clearly. Sheriff Lucas Reed. Ethan's grip on his gun tightened. "You bastard!" Reed just smirked. "You should have left this alone, Cole." Then he raised his own gun and fired. The gunshot echoed through the empty parking lot. Ethan barely had time to react. Instinct took over. He dove behind a rusted-out car as the bullet whizzed past his head, shattering the motel's neon sign. Sparks rained down, casting flickering shadows across the pavement. Ranger barked, then lunged. Sheriff Lucas Reed barely had time to curse before 80 pounds of furious German Shepherd tackled him to the ground. Ethan didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, his boot slamming into Reed's wrist, knocking the gun loose. It clattered onto the pavement, sliding just out of reach. Reed snarled, throwing a punch. Ethan dodged, grabbed his collar, and slammed him against the car. "You killed her!" Ethan roared. Reed smirked, blood running from the corner of his mouth. "Not the first, Cole," he rasped. "And she won't be the last." Ethan saw red. His fist connected with Reed's face once, twice. The sheriff's head snapped back, blood splattering onto the snow. But before Ethan could land another blow, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Flashing lights rounded the bend. Deputy Karen Hughes and 2 more officers skidded into the lot, guns drawn. "Drop IT!" Hughes shouted. Ethan hesitated, his breath ragged. Reed chuckled, coughing up blood. "Bad timing, Cole," he sneered. Hughes stepped closer, gun aimed directly at Ethan. For a split second, he thought she was going to arrest him. Then her gun swung toward Reed. "You son of a bitch," Hughes spat. Reed's smirk faltered. "Karen, don't be stupid." "Shut up," Hughes snapped. Her hands were shaking. "I knew something was wrong with you. She exhaled sharply. "I just didn't want to believe it." Ethan's stomach twisted. "How deep does this go?" he asked. Hughes' jaw clenched. "You have no idea." Hughes handcuffed Reed, her expression stone cold. "Sheriff Lucas Reed, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and boom." A gunshot from the woods. Ethan barely had time to react before Hughes cried out, collapsing to the ground. "Sniper!" Ethan yelled, ducking behind the car. Blood seeped through Hughes' uniform as she gasped for breath. The officers scrambled for cover. The shot had come from the tree line. Someone else was out there. Watching. Hunting. Reed laughed. Even cuffed, even beaten, he grinned through the blood in his teeth. "You really think I'm the only one?" he rasped. "You're in way over your head, Cole." Ethan ignored him. Ranger was already sniffing the air, ears pinned back. He had the scent. "Find them, boy." The chase was on. Ethan followed Ranger into the woods, his heart pounding. Snow crunched beneath his boots. His breath fogged in the freezing air. Somewhere ahead, the sniper was running. Then movement. A figure in black darted between the trees. Ethan raised his gun. "Stop!" The figure turned. For a brief second, Ethan's blood ran cold. Because he knew that face. Father Benedict Holly. The priest fired first. Ethan dodged, returning fire. Bark splintered from the trees. Father Benedict disappeared over a ridge. "Ranger, go!" The dog bounded ahead, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Ethan followed just in time to see Ranger tackle Benedict to the ground. The priest hit the snow hard, groaning as Ranger growled, teeth bared inches from his throat. Ethan leveled his gun. "Give me one reason not to pull this trigger," he said coldly. Father Benedict spat blood into the snow. Then he whispered, "The shepherds are everywhere." Ethan's grip tightened. "Who are they?" Benedict laughed. "You think you're getting out of this alive?" Then he bit down. Ethan's eyes widened. A cyanide capsule. Benedict convulsed, foam spilling from his lips. Within seconds he was dead. Back at the sheriff's office, Hughes was patched up, her face pale but determined. Reed sat in a holding cell, staring at the wall. "Benedict's dead," Ethan told her. She flinched. And before he died, he said something about the shepherds. Hughes' knuckles turned white. "Yeah," she murmured. "I know." Ethan's stomach sank. "You knew?" Hughes looked at him. And for the first time, he saw fear in her eyes. "Ethan, this doesn't end with Benedict." She leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "The shepherds have been running Havenwood for decades. Reed was just one of their enforcers. Benedict was just their mouthpiece. But the real leaders?" She swallowed hard. "They're still out there. And they won't stop until you're dead." Ethan exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear. Not doubt. Determination. "Then I guess I'd better start hunting them first," he said. The snowstorm had passed, but Havenwood felt darker than ever. Ethan sat in his cabin, staring at the case notes spread across the table. The room was dimly lit. The only sound was the occasional crackle of the fireplace and Ranger's slow, rhythmic breathing beside him. Sheriff Reed was locked up. Father Benedict was dead. But the shepherds were still out there. And they were watching. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "Think, Cole. Think." Lisa Reynolds had known the truth. She had almost told him before she was silenced. What did she know? What had Emily Carter found that made her a target? The church. Everything pointed back to Havenwood Church. And Ethan was going to find out why. It was just past midnight when Ethan and Ranger made their way back to the church. The town was silent. Even the usual distant howl of wolves had faded. Ethan scanned the perimeter, his breath fogging in the cold. No sign of movement. Good. He picked the side door lock again, slipping inside with Ranger close behind. The church was empty, but the air felt wrong. Like something was waiting for him. Ignoring the unease creeping up his spine, He moved swiftly toward Father Benedict's office. The sheriff's department had already gone through the priest's things, but Ethan had a hunch they hadn't looked deep enough. He went straight for the bookshelf. Something about it had bothered him last time. He ran his hands along the old wooden edges, feeling for inconsistencies. Then a faint click, and froze. He pressed slightly on the left side of the bookshelf, and it moved. A hidden door. "Bingo," he whispered. With a deep breath, he pushed it open. A narrow stone staircase spiraled downward into darkness. The air grew colder as Ethan descended, flashlight cutting through the pitch-black void. The stone walls were damp, covered in streaks of age-old grime. Ranger was tense beside him, ears perked, growling low. They reached the bottom. Ethan's stomach twisted. The room was larger than expected, almost like an underground bunker. And it was filled with records. Stacks of old ledgers, photographs, files dating back decades. But the most disturbing part? The wall. It was covered in portraits. All women. All young. All with dates written beneath them. And Lisa Reynolds' face was there, marked 2017. Emily Carter's? 2022. Ethan stepped closer, his pulse pounding. Every 2 years, a woman had gone missing. And then he saw the last photograph. The next target. And his blood ran cold. Maggie Sinclair. Her picture was pinned beneath the others, a fresh date written in red ink, 2024. She was next. Ethan's mind raced. Lisa Reynolds had escaped. Emily Carter hadn't. And now Maggie. No, not this time. Ethan turned on his heel, sprinting back up the stairs. He needed to get to Maggie, now. But as he reached the top, the church doors slammed shut. A shadow moved in the aisle. Ethan's breath caught. Someone was here, and they had been waiting for him. "You've been busy, Cole." The voice was smooth, calm, controlled. Ethan aimed his gun. A figure stepped into the faint glow of his flashlight. His heart stopped. Mayor Richard Hawley, Father Benedict's brother, the most powerful man in Heavenwood. And behind him, 3 more figures. Ethan recognized 2 of them instantly. Sheriff Lucas Reed, now free. Deputy Karen Hughes, his only ally. Or so he had thought. Karen's face was unreadable, but her gun was drawn pointed at him. "Welcome to the Shepherds," Mayor Hawley said. Ethan's grip on his gun tightened. He had just walked into a trap. Ethan stood frozen in the center of Heavenwood Church, his gun raised. But he was outnumbered. 4 against 1. Mayor Richard Hawley, Sheriff Lucas Reed, Deputy Karen Hughes, and an unknown 4th figure still cloaked in shadow. Ranger growled low, his body coiled, ready to attack. Ethan's mind raced. How the hell did Reed get free? And Karen, had she been playing him all along? "Put the gun down, Cole," Hawley said smoothly. Too smooth. Ethan tightened his grip. "Like hell I will." "Come on," Reed sneered. His face was still bruised from their last encounter. "You didn't actually think we'd let some washed-up journalist take us down, did you?" Ethan's heart pounded. He glanced at Karen. "You knew," he said, voice edged with betrayal. "You knew all along." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Guilt? Regret? Then it was gone. "It's bigger than you think, Ethan," she said quietly. "Then explain it to me." Karen hesitated. But Hawley cut in first. "We are the Shepherds," he said, stepping forward. "We guide this town. We protect it." Ethan barked a laugh. "By murdering innocent women." Hale's expression didn't change. "Sacrifices must be made." Ethan shook his head. "Emily Carter was investigating you, wasn't she?" Hawley smiled. "Smart girl," he admitted. She asked too many questions. Just like Lisa Reynolds. Just like all the others. Ethan's stomach twisted. What did you do to them? Holly sighed, as if bored. Some things are best left undiscovered, Cole. Ethan's blood boiled. Why Maggie? He pressed. She has nothing to do with this. Holly shrugged. Insurance. To keep people in line. That was it. Ethan fired first. The bullet whizzed past Hale's head. Chaos erupted. Ranger lunged at Reed, his powerful jaws clamping onto the sheriff's arm. Karen fired. Ethan barely dodged, rolling behind a pew. Holly shouted something, but Ethan wasn't listening anymore. All he could hear was the rush of adrenaline. He whirled around, landing a solid punch to Karen's ribs. She staggered back, but she wasn't out. Reed slammed Ethan into a pillar, knocking the wind from his lungs. But Ethan recovered fast, grabbing the sheriff's head and smashing it against the wood. Crack. Reed collapsed. Holly pulled out his own gun, but Ranger was faster. The dog leapt, teeth bared, and ripped into the mayor's leg. Holly screamed. Karen hesitated just for a second. Ethan didn't. He grabbed her gun, twisted it, and fired. The unknown fourth figure fell. For the first time, Ethan saw their face. Father Benedict. Not dead. Not until now. Ethan grabbed Ranger and ran. He crashed through the church doors, into the freezing night. Gunshots rang out behind him. But he didn't stop. Not until he reached Maggie's cafe. He slammed the door open. We have to go. Now. Maggie blinked, confused. Ethan. No time. They're coming. She hesitated, then grabbed her coat. They were out the door before the shepherds could find them. They had survived. For now. As they sped out of Havenwood, Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. The church stood ominous against the dark sky. He knew this wasn't over. He knew the shepherds wouldn't stop. But neither would he. I'll be back, he murmured. Maggie looked at him. Ethan, what now? He exhaled slowly. Now? We hunt them. The road stretched into darkness as Ethan pushed the truck's speed past its limits. Snow-covered trees blurred past the windows. Maggie sat beside him, silent, gripping the dashboard. In the back seat, Ranger lay curled up, still panting from the fight. The shepherds would be hunting them. They had to disappear. Where are we going? Maggie finally asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. His mind was racing, calculating every move. Somewhere safe, he muttered. But the truth was, nowhere was safe. Ethan pulled off the main road, taking a winding back route through the forest. I know someone, he said after a moment. Someone who might be able to help. Maggie turned to him, her brows furrowed. Who? Ethan hesitated. A man named Henry Shaw. Maggie's eyes widened. Shaw? The guy who went missing years ago? Ethan nodded. He didn't disappear. He went underground. They drove for another hour before reaching a rundown hunting cabin deep in the woods. Ethan killed the engine and stepped out. The air was silent, too silent. Maggie shivered, pulling her coat tighter. Are you sure he's here? Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the door and knocked 3 times. Silence. Then a shotgun cocked. Turn around. Hands up. Ethan froze. A man stood behind them, half hidden in the shadows, his gun trained on Ethan's back. Shaw, Ethan said calmly. Henry Shaw stepped forward, older, grizzled, his eyes sharp with suspicion. Cole, you've got some nerve showing up here. Inside, the cabin was cramped but secure. The windows were barricaded, the walls lined with maps and surveillance photos. You're in deep shit, Shaw said, setting his shotgun down. Yeah, no kidding, Ethan muttered. Maggie crossed her arms. You know about the shepherds, don't you? Shaw's jaw tightened. I used to be one of them. The room went dead silent. Ethan tensed. What? Shaw exhaled, rubbing a hand over his beard. I was part of their network until I tried to leave. They don't let people leave, Cole. Maggie swallowed hard. So they tried to kill you. Shaw nodded. But I disappeared first. Ethan clenched his fists. If Shaw had been inside, that meant he knew how to take them down. Tell me everything. Shaw leaned forward, his voice low. The shepherds aren't just some backwoods cult. They control everything: money, law enforcement, even the damn elections. And the missing women? Ethan pressed. Shaw's face darkened. Sacrifices, he said simply. Blood rituals to maintain power. Every 2 years they choose someone. And if they don't, he hesitated. They lose everything. Ethan's stomach twisted. Emily Carter had died because she uncovered the truth. And Maggie? She had been next. We have to stop them, Ethan said. Shaw sighed. That's suicide. Maybe, Ethan admitted. But I don't see any other choice. Before Shaw could respond, Ranger lifted his head, growling. Ethan's phone buzzed. A text message. Blocked number. He opened it. A single image appeared. It was Maggie's cafe burning. Beneath it, a message. Come home, Cole. Let's finish this. Ethan's blood ran cold. They know where we are, Maggie whispered. Shaw stood abruptly, grabbing his gun. Then we end this. Now. The air in the cabin felt heavy. The only sound was Ranger's low growl, his body tense, ears pinned back. Ethan stared at the phone screen, the image of Maggie's cafe in flames still glowing in the dim light. They're baiting us, Maggie murmured. Ethan clenched his jaw. Yeah. And I'm taking it. Shaw exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You're walking into a trap, Cole. I know. Maggie grabbed his arm. Ethan, think about this. I have, he said. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. This ends tonight. Shaw crossed his arms. You're going to need backup. Ethan glanced at him. You in? A beat of silence. Then Shaw smirked. Damn right I am. Shaw spread out a detailed map of Havenwood, marking key locations. The shepherds control the church, the town hall, and the sheriff's office. But their real stronghold is an underground chamber beneath the cemetery. Ethan frowned. That's where they hold their rituals. Shaw nodded grimly. That's where they sacrifice their chosen victims. Maggie swallowed hard. If we take them out there, we end it? Shaw hesitated. Maybe. But these bastards don't scare easy. Ethan checked his gun, then patted Ranger's head. Then we'll just have to make them. The cemetery loomed in the darkness, its iron gates standing wide open. The wind howled through the gravestones as Ethan, Maggie, and Shaw moved in. The ground was fresh with boot prints leading toward the old mausoleum. They're already here, Shaw muttered. Ethan exchanged a glance with Maggie. You still sure about this? She exhaled. Not even a little. He gave her a small nod. Good. Me neither. They moved silently toward the crypt. Shaw reached into his jacket, pulling out a small bundle of dynamite. Ethan raised a brow. You carry that around for fun? Shaw shrugged. Never know when you need to blow up a cult. Inside the mausoleum, a hidden staircase led deep underground. Torchlight flickered from below. Chanting echoed through the stone walls. Ethan's pulse pounded. Let's move, he whispered. They descended, weapons drawn. Then they saw it. The shepherds stood in a circle, dressed in black robes. And in the center of the chamber, a woman bound, gagged, and terrified. Maggie gasped. Oh my God, she's alive, Ethan muttered. They weren't too late. But then Hale stepped forward. "I knew you'd come, Cole," the mayor said smoothly. Ethan's grip tightened on his gun. "Let her go." Hale chuckled. "Oh, I don't think so." A dozen guns cocked in response. Ethan, Shaw, and Maggie were surrounded. Hale smirked. "Welcome to the end of your story, Cole." "Not quite," Ethan muttered. He whistled sharply. Ranger lunged. The German Shepherd crashed into one of the guards, knocking them to the ground. Shaw tossed the dynamite. Boom! The explosion rocked the chamber, sending dust and debris cascading from the ceiling. Ethan fired. Chaos erupted. Maggie tackled the bound woman, slicing her ropes free. Hale shouted something, but no one was listening anymore. Ethan charged forward, slamming his fist into Reed's jaw. The sheriff stumbled back, blood spraying from his mouth. Hale turned to run. "Oh no, you don't," Ethan growled. He grabbed Hale by the collar, slamming him against the stone wall. "Call them off." Hale spat blood, laughing. "You think killing me will stop this?" He sneered. "The Shepherds are bigger than me, Cole. You kill one of us, 10 more take our place." Ethan pressed his gun to the mayor's temple. "Then let's start with one." A single gunshot echoed through the chamber. Hale slumped to the ground. The Shepherds scattered. It was over. By dawn, the town was waking up to the news. The Havenwood Church had burned. The Shepherds were gone. And Mayor Hale was dead. Ethan leaned against his truck, staring at the rising sun. "So what now?" Maggie asked. Ethan exhaled. "We rebuild. We move on." She nodded, but her eyes were uncertain. "And if there are more?" Ethan's gaze darkened. "Then we hunt them. Because this wasn't over. Not yet. But for now they had won. And that was enough. For now."